Namaste and greetings to everyone from Council to Secure Justice. We are an organization based in Delhi, India. Today, I and my colleague Shipra Marathi will be talking about restorative justice and practices with children in Delhi. I'm Urvashi Tilak and I head the restorative justice team. So today we'll be talking a lot about the models which we have set up in Delhi and about a little bit about our work and our organization with all of you. We thank RJ World Conference for giving us this opportunity and hope that you all like the presentation and do give us your suggestions and thoughts on the presentation. And we look forward to more communication from all of you. Before we begin the presentation, I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be talking about cases which may be a bit difficult to hear. So we would really encourage all of you to take care of yourself in the way whatever seems comfortable for each one of you. And do feel free to watch the presentation at your own pace. So beginning, we just wanted to talk a little bit about the journey of CSJ and how we began. So CSJ as an organization began operations in 2013 in Delhi. And though right now we are working in Delhi, we are slowly expanding our work to other states as well. But way back when we began in 2013, there was a special law which was introduced for children called the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences. Offences Act. This was introduced in 2012 in the month of November. And when this law came into being, this law was specifically meant to address different acts against children, sexual offences, pornography, and sexual harassment. So we started working in providing children with providing legal and psychosocial support to children, specifically from the low socioeconomic background. The idea behind this project was to support these children, to help them in the legal system throughout. So the social worker and lawyer worked with the children and the families throughout the legal process and started providing support to these families and also started linking them up to different services. And so far we have taken around over 200 or so cases, and it's through our these cases that we started deriving a lot of learnings. So essentially what we learned was that even though these children were provided support throughout the criminal justice system and the law was child friendly, there were several provisions, there are several provisions till date which make the mechanism for children much more easier, and there are separate courts for children. There is a separate room which is developed, which is called the vulnerable witness room, where children essentially go and testify so that they do not have to meet or come in contact with the person who have harmed them. But despite that, there has been a lot of re-traumatization which happens with these children. And it's during this course that we started realizing that even in cases which resulted in conviction, there was little which the system did to address their needs. The system does not ask the children what is it that they needed. Whose obligation is to meet those harms, and also what did the children sort of look forward to. And in cases, especially more so in incest cases, we noticed that there was so much harm caused to the family members, there was so much of brokenness in the family, that despite that the child would go ahead and testify, there was little support which the child got from their own family members. And this was more so in one of like couple of cases which we came across. For example, in one of the cases in the child basically was abused by her own father for a couple of months. And when she finally reported the case, her mother did not believe her at all. In fact, she kept going back and forth and she did not believe the daughter. One of the main reasons was also why she wanted the child to withdraw the case was the financial reasons. So when we started talking to the child mentioned how she couldn't come to terms with the fact that her own mother could not support her, and she kept grappling with that fact. It is through cases like these that we started exploring what is the idea of justice, what does justice mean to people. And this is where we started exploring the work, and we released a study in 2018 with National Law University Delhi. And in this study, basically the study combined a lot of interviews were conducted, interviews with children, our own clients, children who were sexually abused, their parents, we spoke to them. We also conducted interviews with adult adult survivors who were sexually abused when they were children. And we also conducted a lot of focus group discussions in the format of circle with young adults and groups with women. And in fact, there was this one particular group of women we worked with in a community for over a period of 3 months. And these circles were held weekly to understand what was their reasoning when, what happened, what did they do when something happened in the community, or when they got to know about a harm in the community, or what would one do if one was faced with a conflict in their respective homes. And increasingly what came out from the study was that people saw the criminal justice system as the last resort. And in fact, several community members spoke about how they would prefer resolving the conflict or whatever issues came up more with the family members, involving the neighbors or involving influential people from the community, but they would not go and report the cases. And it was also through a lot of these focus group discussions which we conducted in circle formats. A lot of people shared about the harm which was caused to them when they were children. And they spoke about how they lacked the vocabulary to speak at that point of time what had happened to them. In fact, in two of the interviews which I conducted with adult survivors, that came out so starkly. The adult survivors spoke about how when they were abused, they did not have the vocabulary to share with their own parents about what had happened to them. And they still had anger with the fact that the parents did not do anything about it. And they still grappled with it, and that is something which came out much more. But please feel free to, we would really encourage you to look at this report with extensive study and which looks at also the practices which is prevalent in the country. That would be a very good read. So it's through these cases that we started exploring where is the possibility of restorative justice and restorative practices in the country. And specifically in relation to our work, because we work with children. Now, something which I had mentioned earlier, that we work specifically with children who are sexually abused. They come under, the cases are reported under the POCSO law. Now, under that law, it becomes very difficult for the children to even have face-to-face dialogue with the people who have harmed them, even if they are the family members, because the legal provisions do not allow for that. And also there is a lot of risk of children talking directly to the people who have caused them harm because of power dynamics, because of other practices involved. So we started also exploring if there was any possibility of working with children on a larger category of children, where children who basically caused harm. Was there any possibility of working with them? And it is through that we started exploring this idea. In fact, there is a separate law altogether, which is called the Juvenile Justice Act, which came into being way back in 1986. The law has been amended a lot since then, and it is quite a comprehensive law. It includes basically two categories of children: children who need care and protection, and children who are in conflict with law. So children who need care and protection are children who are basically, if they are orphans, or they required support from the state, where the families are not being providing them support. So there are sponsorship schemes which are available. There is aftercare, there's mention of that. So we started working with a category of children who are in conflict with law. And these children are those who cause harm to others, and they come in contact with the system. So the law for them is separate as compared to the adult system. So essentially, under the Juvenile Justice Act, there are juvenile justice boards which are set up, which are to function very separately and very differently, and they're supposed to work in a child-friendly manner with these children. So the idea is that these juvenile justice boards comprises of 3 members. One is a judicial magistrate, accompanied by 2 more social workers who are experienced in the fields of child rights. So these children are produced in these JJB juvenile justice boards, and the trials are essentially to be completed. The serious offences are supposed to be completed within a year or maximum a year, but practically that does not happen because of the overburdening of the system. So when we started looking, we started working with these categories of children. we started working with the observation home, and we started exploring different ideas, which my colleague Shipra is going to talk about. And we started conversing, having conversations and dialogues with a lot of stakeholders, essentially the judges, the Juvenile Justice Board members, different government stakeholders, to see where best the restorative justice models can fit in. And it's through that we establish the three models, which I think Shipra is going to speak about.
Like Urvashi mentioned, we started discussions and deliberations with several stakeholders, which included judges, lawyers, and members of child welfare committees. We also looked at practices around the world, and based on these conversations and our research, we have developed models. So, two of the models, we work with children who are in conflict with the law. So, we conduct integration processes with children who are in conflict with law and who are institutionalized. And we also conduct restorative justice processes with children who are in conflict with law. And we also have developed processes and models for reintegration and healing circles with children who have experienced sexual harm. And further, we'll be talking about all three models. But we have developed protocols for all of these models, and we also have ethical guidelines in place for all the models. And our approach towards approach while working with in these models is needs based. And Aarti Mohan, who is my colleague, she is presenting in the conference on rights and need based RJ for children. So moving on, we will be talking about the models, and first we'll be talking about the reintegration circle with children who are in conflict with law. So most of the CCLs are institutionalized, and these institutions are what we call observation homes, which are essentially similar to the detention facilities. And these children, when they come into the institutions, their families and the children both together, they experience a lot of harm. There are a lot of consequences of a child being in an institution. There's a lot of stigma attached to it as well. And the children that we work with are from lower socioeconomic background as well. So there's a financial toll on the family when the child is institutionalized. And we have realized that there's a lot of impact on the family and the child. And when the child goes back in the family after the institutionalization, there's a need of reintegration. And so as I mentioned, we started working in the observation home. I'll be talking about that further. And the purpose of these processes is rehabilitation and reintegration, while we also focus on accountability and responsibility. Most of the cases that we have identified for reintegration, we have identified from the circle processes that we do in the observation home. The detention facility where we work, home where we started working in Delhi, the children reside there who are between the ages of 10 to 16 years, and the children stay there for a month or maximum. There have been kids who have stayed there for almost a year now. So we started conducting restorative circles in these in this observation home. And in the circle, we focused on the voluntary nature of the circle, and we provided safe space for the children. We also provided them autonomy and choice. And we realized that when children are placed in such institutions, they do not have autonomy and choice. And we focused on providing them that through the circle processes. And we have seen over the time that children start co-facilitating the circles with us, and children have shared quite vulnerably as well. And we have been doing this circles since 2018 now. And Mukta, who is my colleague in Council to Secure Justice, she'll be presenting about healing circles and listening circles in prisons, which is similar to the work that we are doing in the observation homes. And we've also conducted circles which are very themes based. And we have spoken about several topics ranging from consent, gender roles, and also we have addressed bullying and teasing in the observation home through the circle processes. We have also started working with the staff at the observation home, and we have conducted restorative circles with the staff as well, and we have had communication over their punitive attitudes that they hold towards the children and the justice system as well. And we showed them this movie called Rubaru Roshni, which is an Indian movie that talks about three cases which are of when there was a severe harm, and all of these cases were quite famous cases in India, and how the person's process of meeting with the person who had caused harm to their family and their loved ones, and the process of healing as well. So we have seen the change in the staff's mindset and attitudes regarding restorative justice and punishments essentially. So like I mentioned, most of our cases we identify through the restorative circles that we conduct, and then we move forward with the reintegration process. So we start, once we identify a case, which is often because a child expresses that the family is not meeting him, or the family is not contacting the child when the child is inside the institution, or the child speaks about remorse or wanting to apologize or something like that, which often happens in the circles that we conduct. And then we move forward and we start having the preliminary meetings with the child inside the home. And once the counselor identifies what are the needs and if we can go ahead with the process, it's then that we inform the child about the process and what it could look like for the child. And we record the child's assent, and then we contact their family, and similarly, we record their consent as well if they wish to go ahead with the process. We also try to contact community-based agencies and additional support persons other than the parents who can be part of the process and who can provide long-term support to the child. There have been issues in identifying these agencies and support persons. So after identifying these support persons and after meeting with the family, we start prepping the child. We have developed set of questions and tools that we use in these preparations. And it's after that that we prepare the support persons and the family as well. And it's after these extensive preparations that we actually go ahead with the circle process. So that's how the process looks like for reintegration. And we have worked with several cases over the years for reintegration. And initially, when we started working and when we started identifying cases, we identified 6 cases for reintegration, and we could only do 3 processes and conversations essentially. And in one of the child's cases, he had agreed to be part of the process with his grandfather. He did not have any other close family members, and the extended family was not very supportive. And later, it was later during the prep that the child was not comfortable going ahead with the process and having a conversation with his grandfather. So we did not go ahead with the process. And it was after a few months that the child got back to us saying that he was interested in having the conversation with his grandfather, but it was due to the grandfather's ill health that we could not go ahead. There was another case where we started working with the child, and we had initial meetings with the family as well. And the child was inside the home when we started the conversation. And then the child got bail, and when he went home, he realized that his parent had sold a lot of their belongings just to get the child out on bail. And he realized that, and he felt he didn't have the heart to go ahead with the process and have the conversation about the harm he had caused with his parents. And this was a case of sexual harm. And in all of these cases, we have always given the kids an option that they could contact us whenever they feel like they want to continue with the process. And one of the cases where we completed a reintegration process was Ishan's case. Ishan used to come to our circles, and that's how we identified the case. And we facilitated a reintegration circle with his family. And in this case, we focused on COSA model, which is a circle of support and accountability. And we worked with Ishan a lot, and there were extensive preps. So we worked with him on accountability and understanding the actions he has committed and also the harm, not just on the person harmed, but also on his family. And there was also a lot of discussion on support in the circles as well, where we focused on readmission to the school and how his family could support him in the process. So we did 2 circles in Ishan's process. The first circle was a bit impromptu. So initially, because this case was of sexual harm, Ishan was not comfortable having the conversation with his entire family, but he agreed to talk to his father, and we had prepped the father as well. And on the day when they were supposed to have the conversation, the father and the son, the rest of his family members also came to the court where we were going to have the conversation. And since everyone wanted to meet Ishan, Ishan agreed to have the conversation with everyone. And so the conversation turned into a circle, and we just sort of let it flow organically. And the second circle with Ishan, we conducted when he was released on bail from the observation home. So right before he was released, we conducted the circle with his parents. And on the screen, you can see the photo. This is when Ishan was released after the circle, and he's going home with his parents. So now Urvashi will be talking about the other 2 cases where we have done the reintegration process.
Yeah. So like Shipra mentioned, all the three children, in fact, we met them the first time through the circle processes, which we conduct regularly in the detention centers. So Bipin and Udit were, similarly, we met them in the circle processes. So both the children, actually, the way it started was because the children expressed remorse, and they wanted to speak about it. They were also acknowledging the fact that a lot of harm had been caused to their families for being in the system in the first place. So when we started working with Bipin, he was accused of murder in a case. He and There was another child called Tanmay. Bipin and Tanmay both came in the same case. While we worked with both the children, however, Tanmay's case, we could not go ahead with the reintegration process because there were apprehensions from his side to have conversations with the family. So we held that, but we did go ahead with the conversation with Bipin's family. In fact, in Bipin's case, it was a bit complex also because of the nature, not only because of the nature of the case, but also because there was intimate partner violence in his family, which had been going on for around 15 years or so. And he had grown up seeing that. So that was also complicated. Also, his father, he's almost an absentee father. He was into alcohol addiction, so it was very difficult to sort of get him to have to be part of the circle process. So eventually we decided, after much prep with both the mother and the father, we decided that it would be good for at least the mother and Bipin to have a conversation, because the father was not keen on it, and left the family to his native place. So when we had the discussion, it actually was quite powerful to see the mother acknowledging and also asking very tough questions to Bipin about the incident, because she was really shocked because of the nature of the act which he had done, and more so because she was very close to Bipin, and she did not expect him to take such a drastic step. There were financial issues with the family, but she did not. But she was also the main breadwinner of the family, and somehow she could not come to terms with the fact that Bipin could have done something like this all by himself. So the conversation which happened between the mother and the son was essentially where Bipin spoke about why he did what he did, and also spoke about his own reasoning, not justifying the act, acknowledging that what he had done was wrong, but at the same time telling his mother very honestly what circumstances sort of led him to do that, and taking full responsibility for what he had done. And similarly, in Udit's case, Udit was also accused of murder. So initially, when we met him through the circle process, Udit was having nightmares, and he had sleepless nights thinking about the person who had lost his life. And there were three other people involved in the case with him, and they were adults. And Udit was the only one who was the juvenile in the case. So his case was being tried under uh, in the JJP, in the Juvenile Justice Boards. So when we initially started working with Udit, he mentioned about how his family did not even come to meet him in the detention center. So these detention centers they have provision where the families can come and meet the children once in a week or so. And he expressed how the families were just not coming to meet him. There was also the issue that the family belonged to a different state, and hence they were not able to travel this part. But when we got in touch with the family, there was a lot of anger, and because of that anger, the family did not even wanted to meet him. In fact, they asked us when we first contacted them that whether the child could stay in the detention center forever, and they didn't wanted to take him back because he had brought in a lot of shame to the family. And this was also because they mentioned about how their entire family had no history uh, of entering into the criminal justice system, and he had let down the family members. How there was so much of shame involved, specifically in the community, because they were little better off as compared to other kids we have been working with. So the mother had a lot of anger towards the child. So after a lot of discussions, they finally came to meet with Udit, and that's where we started prepping Udit and started working with the family members to have a circle process. And eventually, after 8 months or so of working with Udit, because he was still inside the detention center for a good 8 to 9 months. We worked with him and his family members separately to have a circle process. And then eventually we did have a circle process once Udit was released from the detention center at his own residence, which was outside Delhi. And when we had this discussion, when we had the circle process, the mother asked a lot of tough questions to Udit. And most of the questions he could not answer. But at the same time, he was the mother after the circle process. We did have individual sort of feedback and also evaluation with each of the people who were involved in the circle process. And when we spoke to each of the individual members, what also came out was that they saw this as an essential process, because if this was not done, it would basically have not given them an opportunity to have discussions or even talk as a family of what had happened and what they all had gone through because of the case. And the mother said that, if we would not have facilitated the circle process, perhaps she would have never got the opportunity to ask those questions to Udit. In fact, something which came out quite a lot, and Udit had been saying, he had sort of shared this with us even during the prep session, was that he wanted to support the family members of the person who was killed, because he was the main bread earner of the family. And he shared that with his family during the circle process as well. And his mother said that, if there was a system they could actually provide, eventually when Udit will start earning, he wanted to support. But unfortunately, the system does not allow for such provisions. But we still continue to work with these families. And in the process, this is something which we keep following up with them as well. So this is one of the models which we work with. So the second model which we sort of developed after much discussion was also the restorative justice processes with children who are in conflict with law. And for this, we started, the main idea of doing restorative justice with children was to give opportunity to children to sort of accept and acknowledge the harm which they had caused, and also to help them have a discussion and facilitate a dialogue and or a conference wherever possible. And for this, what we started working with the juvenile justice boards directly. We wanted to establish models within the juvenile justice system. So these processes were conducted with the scope of giving, the space to also the child and also the person who was harmed. And most of the cases which we were referred were also involved, the person harmed was mostly an adult. So essentially, we were working with children who had caused harm, but at the same time, when it came to the dialogue, it was mostly the people, the adult people. So we also had to keep a lot of things in mind. So we did for developing these models, we did look into a lot of the child rights model, and whether we are putting the children at risk, and doing all that risk assessment was also done. So this was one of the particular models we started developing. And while there was a lot of apprehension initially when we started having conversations with the juvenile justice board members and the judges, there was this apprehension as to which cases should we begin with, because there was apprehension of whether we should start with serious offenses. So initially we restricted and we started with petty offenses, cases where children had committed theft or robbery, or maybe there was harm, physical harm, or maybe there was issues of trust. So these were the cases we initially started working with. And what we did was also we developed ethical guidelines and protocols for these processes. And in the next slide, we will see that how there was a model which we developed. So there was assessment stages which we conducted. So initially, when we started working with these children were basically referred to us for counseling directly from the juvenile justice boards. Now, the counseling was also done with the intention of seeing if there was some ways we could help the child with. So in these counseling sessions, we had trained restorative justice experts and also counselors from the restorative justice team who would talk to these children. And while having conversations with children, if the children felt that they would like to meet with the person and talk to the person they have caused harm to, or even if the fact that they would accept the responsibility for what they had done, that's where we would start working with children. And if the children agreed, there was assent taken from the children, and also, of course, consent taken from their respective parents. We would proceed and we would contact the person who was harmed. And after talking to the person harmed, depending on if they would want to go ahead with the process, we would sort of have prep sessions with them, separate prep sessions with them. And the idea also was to, again, tap into the community-based support system. So essentially making sure that, as I mentioned earlier about the Juvenile Justice Act, that the whole process, that the whole law focuses a lot on rehabilitation and reintegration of the child. And the main idea behind is that the child should not come back into the system. And this is something which resonates with us while we develop the restorative justice models. So when we started working with these children, we would also give them the option if they would like the support person involved in the conversations which they had. And also it's sometimes required to speak to their respective lawyers, because in some of the cases, when the cases were referred to us, the lawyers would discourage the children from sort of accepting what they had done, but because of how it would impact the cases. So hence that's why we stuck to cases which were petty offenses to begin with. So while after doing prep sessions with both the children who had caused harm and also the people who were harmed, then we would have sort of a conversation with both of them together, and in some cases the support person as well. So in the next slide, we'll sort of also see how the option was definitely given at all the stages to children who had caused harm, and also the people who were harmed, to withdraw at any stage if they felt that it wasn't sort of necessary. So there were two cases where we actually worked with the children to establish these restorative justice models. So the first case was Zivesh's case. So Zivesh came into the system when he was around 13 or 14 years old, and he came in, one of the offenses which he came in for was petty offense, where he stole a scooty and went for a joyride. And in this process, because we had been working with the child for a very long period of time, because we met Zivesh first through one of the circle processes in the detention facility. We started working with Zivesh, and we asked him whether he would be interested in meeting with the person whose scooty he had stolen. And he agreed for that. And after speaking to his parents, we also got in touch with the person whose scooty was stolen. And he also agreed. So in this process, essentially, we just wanted to say, though there are several prep processes which we do conduct, but in Zivesh's case, though we had been working with the child for long, but with the person who was harmed, in this case the complainant, as we call, with him we actually just did one prep process because of the nature of the offense, and he agreed to have a conversation with Zivesh. And the minute he met Zivesh, he was quite surprised to see that it was such a young child. And he asked him a lot of questions. And in that dialogue, because it was just between Zivesh and the complainant whose scooty was stolen, in that dialogue, the complainant asked him a lot of questions about why did he stole his scooty, why no other scooty, and there were certain questions which Zivesh could not sort of answer. But at the same time, during the discussion process, there was a time when the complainant asked him a lot of questions, and he saw Zivesh feeling really sad about it. And Zivesh looked up to him in the eyes and apologized. And the complainant immediately said that, it is fine and that everybody makes mistake. And that brightened up Zivesh immediately. Similarly, in Chandan's case, this case was again referred to us by one of the juvenile justice boards. And this case actually was registered way back. It had been I think 3 to 4 years, in fact, since the case was in the system. Again, it was a case of petty offense where Chandan had gone into a physical brawl with two other people in this case, and there was a lot of back and forth which had been happening in the case, that the case should be withdrawn, and the complainants in the case, or the people harmed in the case, two of them, they wanted to withdraw the case, but they didn't. They kept going back and forth. So when we were referred this case, we worked with Chandan and we asked him whether you would like to meet with the two people whom you have caused harm to. He agreed. So we did around 2 to 3 prep sessions with Chandan, and we did separate prep sessions with the two people who were harmed by Chandan. And in this case, apart from Chandan, there were several other people, several other relatives who were involved, but they couldn't be part of this conversation. So when we had the discussion, it was just three of them, Chandan, along with two other people who were harmed in the case. So while we had the discussion, Chandan sort of accepted what he had done, and the two people, they clearly said that we just want an apology and we don't want anything else. So Chandan was a bit hesitant, but throughout, after a period of time, he looked at them and he apologized. And the minute he apologized, the two people who were harmed, they looked at him, smiled, and said that, yeah, we are done. Like, we want to withdraw the case, and we don't want to go ahead with the case. And in both the cases, we did these cases, and these cases sort of came to the final stages with the RJ process. And this was mentioned in the final order when the case got completed, that the restorative justice process was conducted. And in both the processes, one thing was we wanted to emphasize was that in both the cases, Zivesh's case, for example, he was a child, but Chandan's case, when the case came to us, by that time, Chandan was already an adult. And in both the cases, there were no other support people required because they did not needed it. But in cases where there is a need of support person, we do work with the support person, and we do work separately with the support person to be part of the circle process. And moving on, um, and I just wanted to also quickly mention here that we did get a lot of cases for doing restorative justice processes with in many of these cases, but we did not go ahead with these processes because some of the cases did not fit the criteria. And when we say that, there were issues with the case where maybe the case was referred to us maybe at the very last stage, and it wasn't apt to do the restorative justice process. Or in one of the cases which we are still working with, it's a murder case. And while we initially, the idea was to do a restorative justice process, when we started working with the victim's family, uh, and in that case, the person lost their life, we saw there was greater need to do more of a healing circle and a grief circle with the family rather than a restorative justice dialogue. So that family was still continuing to work with. And in this regard, I just wanted to mention that Prerna Barua, who's interning with us currently, she's also going to be presenting at the RJ World Conference. And she would be speaking about, the presentation is remembrance-based justice, where she explores this in great detail. So do check out her presentation. Moving forward, I think Shipra is going to be speaking about the third model which we developed. Over to you, Shipra.
So, like Urvashi mentioned, CSJ began with working with children who were sexually harmed, and in that process, as we worked with these children over years, we realized that the children who had experienced this harm, the children and their families, there was this greater need to address the shame, stigma, and further harm that came with disclosure of the abuse and further the criminal proceedings and the cases that were filed. And the children experienced a lot of shame and stigma from the society as well, and their families in turn also experienced a lot of shame and stigma from the community. There were cases where the families had to shift their houses because the police would come to the house and the neighbors would talk, and that also brought a lot of shame to the family. And also in cases when there was incest cases involved, the sole owner of the family would be in custody in cases like father or brother. And in those cases also the family members would have to go out and start earning. So we realized that along with the child, there was a lot of harm that the family experienced as well. And there was a need to address this harm and start the healing process. So that's where we began with the idea of reintegration and healing circles with children who were sexually harmed. So in all the cases where we are referred the cases by child welfare committees, which are the CWCs in Delhi. And our team members who work in the casework team are appointed as a support persons in the cases who provide psychosocial support with these children. And but some cases we also provide legal support, like Urvashi mentions. So from a pool of cases that we work with, often the social worker who is working with the child identifies the need to have healing circle or reintegration circle. And that's when the a team member from restorative justice gets involved. And then there is decision-making meet with the child, where we inform the child about what the process could look like and take their assent if they agree to go ahead with the process. And similarly, we meet with the parents and have a similar conversation about the process and record their consent as well. And then we start preparing the child. With all the cases that we have identified or we thought we could essentially do a healing circle, we realized that prepping the child and the family is quite extensive. And the two cases that we'll be talking about ahead, we are still at the stage where we are preparing the child. And the idea is after we prepare the children, we sort of identify additional support persons with the children as well, because we do see that there is a lot of need for that along with the family support. So we have decision making meet with the additional support person, and then we prep the parents, guardians, and the additional support persons. And after everyone is adequately prepped and the facilitators think it's ready, they are ready to have the process, we go ahead and have the circle process. So that is the idea of having the circle process. As I mentioned, we haven't had a healing circle or reintegration circle yet, since we are still preparing the children. So we'll be talking about two cases here where we are in the process of preparing the children, and we have been working with both these children for over 2 years now. So Ria's case, I'll talk about Ria's case first. So Ria was sexually harmed by her father, and there was a lot of domestic abuse involved as well. There was a lot of interpersonal violence. Her siblings were physically harmed by her father as well. Her mother was severely harmed by the father as well. Then the abuse was reported when Ria spoke to her teacher about it, and the father was taken into custody. But we realized that there was a lot of harm that the family had experienced by the father, and even after the case was reported by Ria. So after this, when we started working with Ria and her family, we realized her brother was severely impacted as well, and there was a lot of external support that the brother needed, and there were a lot of intensive prep sessions that we had with the brother as well, and there was a lot of psychological trauma that we saw. And while we were working with Ria, we also realized that after the father was taken into custody, a few months after that, Ria was also abused by another uncle. So there was second case that was reported. And so because of that, we could not go ahead as planned with the reintegration and healing circle, but we are still working with Ria, and Ria is now in a long-term shelter, and we still continue providing her support, and we do see the value of having a healing circle essentially with Ria and her family. And another case I would like to talk about is Tarini's case. Again, similar to Ria's case, Tarini was sexually harmed by her father. And in Tarini's case, her mother is very supportive. After father, now she is the sole earner in the family, and she drives a taxi, and she's very supportive of Tarini and wants her to continue her education and everything. And Tarini also has a younger brother, and we have seen that though mother was affected by the reporting of the case and everything, Tarini's brother was also severely affected by everything. And he sort of feels that now he needs to assume the role of the man in the family. But also at the same time, because he was impacted so much and the family dynamic has changed so much, he's also started using substances. So there is a lot of impact that her brother has also experienced. And of course, Tarini has been experiencing, her experience was quite traumatic as well. So with all of this, we realized that since the family dynamic has changed a lot, there are a lot of things that are happening for the family, or that had happened for the family since the abuse was reported, that there is need for healing circle as well. And right now we are working with Tarini, and we are having conversations with her family as well, and we'll be exploring healing circles soon with the family. So this is the model of reintegration.
After exploring all the three models, we just wanted to focus a bit on challenges, and we would welcome your thoughts on that, perhaps ways to navigate it. As mentioned earlier, we specifically work with children and their families who come from low socioeconomic background. And when we say that, there is something which we noticed, which was a common pattern in all the families we have worked with so far. There was a lot of intimate partner violence. The children have also witnessed that through throughout while growing up. There is almost an intergenerational violence which they have experienced, and it is also normalized by their mothers. And there is also a lot of alcohol addiction which is prevalent in the family. So while working with the family, it becomes quite challenging. So when we work with the families, it's also working with the family more holistically, which sort of takes a lot of time, because even when we do have conversations or reintegration circles or healing circles or support circles with children, the angle of intimate partner violence cannot be left out. And that is something which we have started exploring slowly. How to work around that, how to develop restorative justice models around that, how to link them up to services. But that has proved to be very challenging. And something which I think Shipra had mentioned earlier about how we have been working in observation homes or as detention centers, which we spoke about clearly. So there we do go regularly. We visit these detention centers every week. But again, the population, these children, they belong to, they there are in the age group of say 10 to 16 years old. And these children, there is a floating population, because these children, they stay in these detention centers depending on the severity of the act which they have committed. So sometimes these children stay for a month, sometimes they stay for 2 months or 3 months. So that becomes challenging for us when we start working with these children, because there have been times where we have lost contact with the child and their families, because they have either moved away their houses, because there's so much of stigma involved the minute the child enters the system, whether it's a child who has been sexually abused, or whether it's a child who has committed harm. In both the cases, the amount of stigma which is associated with the after the case has been reported is so severe that the families have to move places. And in that, it becomes a bit challenging for us to sort of have a constant contact. And something which has also stood out in a lot of cases is the lack of support person. And when we say lack of support person, it essentially again flows from something which I'd said earlier about because these families have migrated from different states and they have come to Delhi. They have very few ties, and even if they have those extended relatives, because again, in the cultural system, in the Indian cultural context, you would know that there is a lot of closeness with the relatives. But despite that, something which we have faced is that the families are extremely hesitant to involve their extended family members, or even it's extremely difficult to find people who are supportive of the child. So even if a child has been sexually abused, they are immediately targeted. And in fact, there is so much stigma attached to it that uh, there is that's the reason, also one of the reasons why we wanted to do healing circles, because to ensure that the child sort of gets that support. So that is something which we have faced definitely. And more so as as I was initially talking about in Bipin's case. In Bipin's case, it was only a dialogue sort of which took place between the mother and Bipin, because the father wasn't there. The siblings were too young to sort of understand the repercussions, and there were no extended family members who were keen on providing support to the child. So in that sense, it becomes quite difficult for us. But in those cases, what we have done is we have provided to be the support person. Again, in some cases, it is something which we have done, but again, as we move on, that has become a growing challenge. And as also mentioned in restorative justice cases, uh, because we work in petty offenses as of now, it has been challenging to see how the person harmed would be interested in coming for the case. So, for example, I remember this specific case where it was a case of mobile theft, and the person whose mobile was stolen, he wanted to have a conversation, because when he looked at the child, he said that he's very young, and um, he clearly has financial difficulties. But at the same time, he wasn't very keen on having a dialogue, because he just wanted his mobile phone back. And that's the reason why he had come to the board, or the juvenile justice board, in the first place. So in petty offenses, that becomes a bit challenging. And of course, there are legal challenges as well, because um, currently in the Indian system, there is no diversion model which is specifically there as is seen in the United States, for example, where the child, when it comes to the system, is given this option whether the child would like to go to the juvenile justice system or would like to prefer a diversion model. So that is something which we are working on, and we are working with the juvenile justice boards, and hopefully there would be a further advocacy and there would be awareness. And in fact, I recently saw that there has been more movement towards providing restorative justice to children, and that is being advocated for. So we are hoping that it comes into the legislation soon. It would take time, but that is something which we are working on. And moving on, we would also like to talk a little bit about the learnings which we have derived from the cases. And these are some of the learnings. Of course, there are several, but just again, something which we noticed was, as I mentioned earlier about Bipin's case, about lack of a support person. And when the dialogue sort of happened between the mother and the child, there was a lot of tension which was sort of noticed, also more so because there were no other members involved. So it's always good to have more support people. And when we had conversations with Sujata Bandika about these cases, she also sort of suggested that, it's a must that we should have more than, we should have minimum of 4 people as support person when we do these circles, because it helps in balancing out the situation. And also there are more people involved to either hold the child accountable, or also to ensure that it's a much more supportive environment. And that is something which we are slowly trying to incorporate more in our protocols as and when we work with children. And something which I mentioned more about that, trying to work with the families holistically. But again, it is something which takes a very long period of time, because as I mentioned earlier, that so when we work with children, we have worked with them for a couple of months, and it is time consuming. And when these dynamics come in, dynamics of intimate partner violence, or there is alcohol abuse, there is financial issues, it becomes difficult, and it becomes difficult to mitigate around these issues. And something also very interestingly which came out in some of the discussions was in the outcome agreements. What we also have realized that it may not be necessary to always have an outcome agreement plan. It would depend from case to case and sort of keep it flexible, because in some of the cases, as we realize that the parents would have a certain expectation from children. They would expect the child to listen to them in every form. And in fact, in one of the outcome agreements, I remember the mother wanted the child not to use a smartphone, which is so common. But she, because in her mind, she felt that the smartphone was the reason why the incident had taken place. So just trying to understand that better, and for us to understand what should actually come into the outcome agreements, and also rationalize it a bit, is something which we have been thinking of. And something which we have realized much more is there is a lot of beauty in the process itself, and it may not result in the outcome agreements. So that is something which we have been going forward with. Moving on, I think Shipra would speak a little bit about some of the projects which we have done. Yes.
While we work on the 3 models that we spoke about of restorative justice and practices, we are also working towards expanding restorative practices across India. So we have implemented a project in Rajasthan along with UNICEF in 5 observation homes, which are the detention facilities. And we focused on doing restorative circles in these observation homes with children who were in conflict with law. And we also trained a local pool of trainers on designing circles, facilitating circles, and documentation as well. And we've also started conducting virtual listening circles for children who are in protective childcare institutions. Most of these children are in protective institutions for a longer duration. And during the COVID lockdown, their daily routine in the institution was disrupted. And so we have been doing virtual listening circles with these children as well. We have also started conducting virtual circles with staff at the childcare institutions and frontline workers as well. And we've started doing this after COVID-19 lockdown in India. And we also plan on expanding these virtual circles for lawyers. And we plan on having listening and support circles for lawyers as well. And I would like to talk a bit about the UNICEF project that we did in Rajasthan. So in this project, we focused on social emotional learning in restorative circles. And we developed a model of these processes, and we had theme-based circles with the children. And the circles had various themes like self-awareness, self-management, and where we also focused on very specific emotions like sadness, anger, anxiety. And the circles also were based around social awareness, relationship building, and decision making. And while we were conducting these circles, we used various social emotion learning tools as well. And you can see some of the tools here. And in the corner of the screen, you can also see a talking piece which was created by one of the persons that we trained during the trainings. And we'll be releasing a report of the project that we did soon. And so here you can see on the screen, you can see the image of virtual circles that we are doing with the staff in childcare institutions and also with frontline workers. So mainly we are doing circles with frontline workers who are working in child protection and who are constantly working during the COVID-19 crisis. So as you can see on the screen, so most of our virtual circles, the nature have been like the facilitators are of course not present physically, but most of the participants are present physically. So most of us virtual circles don't really look like virtual circles, but we are still figuring out how we can make the best of the situation and how we can bring the physical circle into virtual media. So now Urvashi will take forward.
So as Shipra mentioned that we are slowly expanding and we are trying to spread awareness on restorative justice. We are also trying to advocate for restorative practices in institutional settings. And we have also taught a course on restorative justice at National Law University for an entire semester with students. And we conducted those classes in circles throughout. There was also a webinar done by our colleague Aarti Mohan on child rights and restorative justice, which is also the topic of our presentation. And this webinar was essentially attended by a lot of students, practitioners, academicians who are interested in knowing more about restorative justice and exploring restorative justice models in their respective settings. We have also been doing a lot of active engagement and discussions with lawyers and judges and training them on what restorative justice looks like, where are the possibilities of doing restorative justice, what are the issues which may come up while working with children on restorative justice, and also sort of establishing different restorative practices. We have been working very consciously with different government stakeholders. And in fact, we have been working with lawyers, we have been training police officials to try and see how much can sort of be established in different settings. And something which we were mentioning earlier as well was working on intimate partner violence issues, and we are slowly trying to explore that with partner organizations, with organizations who are directly working on the ground, working with women and working on issues of gender-based violence for a very long period of time. We have been trying to work with them to develop different models. So that is something which we are slowly exploring in, and we hope to continue to expand our work and build the capacities of our staff as well. Just towards the end, I would like to say that CSG, we are present at different platforms, and so you can find CSJ in different platforms on social media, on Facebook, Twitter. Feel free to write to us and to reach out to us. And just to remind to all of you that we have 3 more presenters from CSJ, Aarti Mohan, Mukta, and Prerna Barua. Do check out their presentations. And we would like to thank you for giving us your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.